So last week we talked about the essential elements or key elements of every good argumentative position paper. And where we left off, I addressed that all good arguments or all arguments typically address other viewpoints or opposing positions. And that leads me to one of the more defining characteristics of an argument position paper is the counterclaim. And if you do not have a counterclaim section of your paper, then an argument you do not have. So this is a key essential element that you have to have developed in your argument position paper. So go with me for a minute to one of my favorite movies, 8 Mile. And if you've seen the movie, or if you haven't, you should, there is this, at the end, there is this climactic rap battle between Jimmy B. Rabbit Smith and Papa Doc, the antagonist, his main ally, main like enemy in the movie. So, as you know, when they get to that epic rap battle, B Rabbit raps first, and his strategy is to bring up and address everything he assumes or knows that Papa Doc plans to say about him before he can bring it up. And when it's Papa Doc's turn, he has nothing to say. He's speechless. And counter arguments in an academic research paper or counter arguments in general function the same way as that final kind of epic rap battle. So counterclaims, essentially, when looking at your paper, are where it's a place in your paper where you set aside the time to acknowledge the opposition, acknowledge the other side, and consider reasons people disagree with your position or the opposing side's argument. Now, where do I begin? The choosing a counterclaim is really important because you don't want to argue a weak position or misrepresent the opponent's opposition. You don't want to misrepresent the other side. And what we call that in the misrepresenting the other side or putting words in their mouth is a logical fallacy called the straw man. There's really no substance. It can't stand. Your position can't stand because you've misrepresented the opposition. So you really want to consider both sides, but only choose a strong counterclaim, not a weak one or a misrepresented idea. So to develop your counterclaim, you want to consider what's wrong with our argument in the eyes of the other side or the eyes of people who would disagree with you. What potential objections can your audience make? And to do this, you really have to be able to put yourself in your opposition's shoes, which is why I suggested you guys not argue something that you're too personal to kind of step away from. So consider the flaws in your argument and how you might address them. Consider quality claims on the opposition side and why those claims haven't changed your mind. Now, in a verbal argument, you have the freedom to go back and forth, right? The opposition says something, I can go back and say something. So there's that freedom and ability to have that kind of dialogue. But in the writing world, you only, like B. Rabbit, get one shot. So don't blow that opportunity. So really think carefully and narrow your counterclaim paragraph to one or two possible objections. So I'm sure that there's a myriad of reasons that people don't agree with abortion, for example. But if I had to think of the strongest possible objection, it would be, well, they don't like the killing of innocent life, right? So that would be probably the one point that I would find and put in my counterclaim if I were writing that paper. So how do I do that? Well, there are three parts to every good counterclaim, and they are the acknowledgement, the concession, and I talked about concessions, and no, I don't mean those overly expensive, delicious treats that you get at baseball games. I talked about concessions last week, and I'm going to talk more about them today. But acknowledgement, concession, and rebuttal. And the easy part is the acknowledgement, or the admission of a valid counterclaim. So some people still argue. Some still believe. There are those who contend, and then you can address the other side. What's their main point of contention? So even in light of this argument, some still believe that abortion is wrong because it kills innocent life. So that's a way to acknowledge the other side. After you've acknowledged your opposition, you want to concede or offer a concession to their point. In other words, acknowledge that there is some value or merit to that position. You have to kind of show that you have, in other words, the finding that common ground, because while we may or may not agree on whether or not abortion should be legal or illegal, we can agree that there is value to human life, and human life is incredibly important, and we should hold the sanctity of that life. So admittedly, certainly, of course, one cannot deny the importance of human life. So you want to concede, and it doesn't take much to concede, but really just kind of show that you've taken the time to really consider that, okay, maybe there is a point or there is some merit to that position, because certainly there is, otherwise people wouldn't feel that the way that they do. So that doesn't mean that you have to agree. Then after you have your concession, you want to offer the rebuttal. And the one thing that I always think about when I think of the word rebuttal, I see that word but right in there. And my grandmother, God love her, she used to say that anything you say before the word but is a lie. So I love you, but I don't want to marry you. So, well, if you don't want to marry me, you really don't love me. So think about it this way. I am acknowledging that you have some validity to your claim, but I still think I'm right. So this is the part of your counter argument where you argue for your position and explain why you still hold true to your claim. So nevertheless, however, even so, those are some phrases that you can use to introduce the rebuttal portion of your counterclaim. So I have an example, and it's a rather lengthy one, so I've broken it up into three parts. So acknowledgement. Considering the many challenges facing public schools, it's understandable that many people would be eager to pursue new options. Supporters of school choice point out that under the current public school systems, Parents with economic means already exercise school choice by moving from areas with failing or dangerous schools to neighborhoods with better, safer schools. Their argument is that school choice would allow parents the freedom, regardless of income level, to select the school that provides the best education. Schools would then have to compete for students by offering higher academic results and greater safety. Schools unable to measure up to the standards of successful schools would fail and possibly close. So I'm acknowledging that there is another side to school choice. My concession, right, where I say, okay, yes, there is validity to this argument. Activists within the school choice movement can be applauded for seeking to improve public education, because we can all agree that education is the most important thing for the growing minds of our society. They can be applauded. I'm acknowledging your effort. Education does need to improve. I agree with you. But the changes they propose would in fact seriously damage education as a whole. So here I have my, okay, kudos to you. I can agree with that education needs reform. But, however, and then I go back to my point that school choice would seriously damage public education. So then I have my rebuttal more in full, where I offer support for my position. So you can take the time to read through this really developed counterclaim, because it is a lengthy kind of paragraph or section of your essay, because you do have to do two things. You have to acknowledge the other side and probably should provide some evidence of how that opposition feels, and then acknowledge or concede, offer some sort of concession and build that common ground with your reader, and then offer your rebuttal, which in turn probably would require and should provide evidence that supports that rebuttal. So take an opportunity in this week's discussion board to really look and develop your counterclaim. And take, for those of you who, for your fellow classmates, look at their counterclaims, look at their positions, and see if you can offer any advice to them. So essentially, your discussion board this week, I'm not asking you to read anything. I am asking you to develop your counterclaim within your discussion boards so you can get some feedback from your members as a whole, so and as well as me. So these are this is what a counterclaim is as a whole, and this is probably one of the most important sections of your argument paper. So let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to answer them.